Hello and welcome to the rest of my apartment. If you're new here, I'm Sophie and this is normally an art channel, like drawing and painting and a lot of rambling on art related topics. And the reason I say welcome to the rest of my apartment is because I usually film most of my videos in my bathroom, like the classy lady that I am. But as you can tell from the title and the thumbnail, this is not an art video. I mean, I guess it kind of is because like knitting's a form of art, but we have emerged from the dingy art bathroom for a knitting video where you can knit along with me no matter your experience, because I started this from ground zero. Oh, and there's also like a free pattern, so like if you needed any more convincing, that's it. I'm making this video and I will make more knitting videos on this channel for 3 reasons. Reason number 1, something you should know about me is that I'm on a never-ending quest for self-sustainability. So like at some point I want to grow a majority of my own food, I want to be able to sew and knit my own clothes, so on and so forth. So like I'm talking, I want chickens, I want tomato plants, I want sheep, you know what I mean? And I live in a small studio apartment, so gardening is not really an option, but that doesn't mean I can't make strides towards my future goals, right? And that's a big theme on my channel and something I'm really trying to push myself towards in general, which is just starting now. No matter what my skills are, because whatever my goals are, no matter how far in the future or how far-fetched they are, I really truly believe that if you start as early as possible and you keep improving, that you'll have results and you'll be able to make something of that skill in the end. So learning how to knit is not only the first step, but it's also one of the more achievable steps towards my goal of self-sustainability. Reason number two, as I mentioned before, and as any returning subscriber will know, this is an art channel, and so like at some point I would really like to have my art on clothing of some type, which means not only do I want to know how to design knitwear and actually knit knitwear and sewing things as well, I would like to know how much time things like this takes, because if I ever have a business of sorts, I want to know how to pay people properly for their time, because the future is all about sustainability and fair wages, baby. So I'm getting on that now. And reason number 3 is because when I wanted to start knitting, I didn't want to knit a scarf or a hat or something else beginner like that, no hate if you did that, but you're kind of a chicken because I know you don't want that scarf, okay? I wanted to go hard right from the get-go, and I wanted to learn how to knit a sweater, something that I could eventually have my art on the front of, and so that I could learn all the techniques I'll need while creating something I'll actually like and want to keep in the end. So my issue with this is, apparently I'm alone. No one else wants to have their first knitting project be a big undertaking like a sweater. So I couldn't find any videos that went from beginning to end of creating a sweater, with one that I actually thought was cute and that I liked and that I would want to keep, because I don't want to knit a sweater and then not like it in the end. So here we are, okay? With my messy apartment in the background. This is my first knitting project. You are seeing me wear it, and the only thing I'd ever knit before it was this little square of fabric, okay? Which was done with embroidery floss from the Dollarama, okay? So if I can do it, you can do it too. It's honestly really easy. There's nothing to be scared of, and it's really calming. So I recommend you try it if you've been wanting to learn how to knit. I was successful, I'm able to wear it, so I must have been kind of successful. But I made a few mistakes, one of which is pretty obvious, which is I made the sleeves kind of weirdly tight in the seam. But don't worry, what that means is that I can help you avoid all the mistakes that I made, and then you can make a perfect, clean sweater in the end. So depending on your level of expertise, I'm going to put timestamps up and you can skip through to whatever you need to know for the sweater. Like if you already know how to do a knit stitch, skip over that section, right? Good, let's go. All right, so let's talk materials, okay? So the first thing you need is knitting needles, of course. And the pattern tells you that you only need 2 knitting needles, which are or 2 pairs of knitting needles, which are the size 6 and size 8 needles. However, don't be fooled, okay? There's a chance you may need another size, which I did. I ended up using size 7 and size 9 knitting needles, which I'll explain later when we get to the gauge section, okay? But just don't trust the pattern necessarily, and unless you know how you knit already, I recommend you do what I did and you get a knitting kit which comes with like every size of knitting needle in nicely little packaged things here, and it also came with other materials, so I'm gonna link that down below. And then honestly, all I had to get apart from this was 2 other things. So if you can get one of these where you're from, you can probably find them at Michael's or get on Amazon. I recommend you do this if you're a beginner, because you never know what size you may actually need. The next thing you're gonna need is a tape measure, okay? And you probably have one of these at home, but I recommend you get one that's like pliable like this, you know, because if you have one that's one of those retractable ones or just a ruler, it's going to be way more difficult to measure things. So it's just a lot easier with one of these, which came in my knitting set. The next thing you're going to need is a wide-eyed needle, okay, which looks like this. It's way wider and way easier to get yarn into than a small needle would be. So you need one of these to finish up all the seams of your sweater. The next thing you need is a whole bunch of stitch markers, which look like this. And they basically are like little clips that open up. You can clip them around a spot in your knitting so that you can count things easier and you can remember where you're doing stuff. So you can probably use paper clips, to be honest with you, but make your life easier. You won't rip your yarn as you might with paper clips. And I recommend you get these. They're really cheap, and I got mine, again, in my set. So this set actually came with knitting needles, the tape measure, the wide-eyed needle, and the stitch markers. So if you can find something like this, I recommend you get it. The next thing you're going to need is scissors, okay? It kind of goes without saying. You're going to need scissors. You probably have those at home. You don't need anything special. Then you're going to need, and I recommend, this is what I did. I waited till the very end to get this because this is literally the last step that you need it. But you're going to need a pair of circular knitting needles, okay? And the pattern says you need circular knitting needles in size 6. I actually ended up needing them in size 7. So, like I said, I would wait till the end, till you've done your gauge to figure out what size you need. And the last thing you need is yarn, okay? And this is where things get a little bit more, you know, personalized. So, the website who made the free pattern, which is called Lion Brand Yarn, they're actually a yarn or knitting, I guess, but mostly yarn producing company. And so they create the free pattern so that you buy their materials and they make money off it. But while we respect this business model, I, as a Canadian, do not respect the shipping charges that it costs to get their yarn to Canada. I actually really did like the color that they used. I like the lilac. So I ended up getting the exact same yarn off a Canadian website, which was called Mary Maxim, if you're in Canada. And I got free shipping and cheaper prices because it was in a Canadian warehouse. So whatever country you're in, if you're not in the US, I highly recommend you find yarn on your own website, and you can choose your own color. You can choose any yarn you want. It just has to be light 3, okay? So what that means is you can't get a super bulky, a bulky 5 yarn. Okay, let me show you just a moment. For example, where does it say? Oh, here. Okay. So this is a bulky yarn, and it actually says here on the top, bulky 5. You can't get something like this even though it's cute, right? You want to knit something, you want to knit this sweater, you need to get any color, any brand, whatever, but light 3 yarn, okay? And the amount of yards you're going to need are really going to depend on the size you're making. But for me, I made a medium, which the pattern says that means I need 4 balls of yarn. But I ended up actually using like 3 balls and then like a little bit. You can see I have like this whole ball of yarn basically. So what I would do if you're not getting this same ball of yarn is I would check the size you're making, okay? Figure out how many yards you need for that size. So for me, I was making a medium, which says you need 4 balls of yarn that are 339 yards each, which means that I am looking for 1,356 yards, but probably less, probably more like 1,000 yards of yarn to make a medium. okay? And so just apply that rule to whatever ball of yarn you're looking for, but you're gonna need a certain amount of yardage depending on your size. So figure that out, but you can get any ball of yarn from any website or go to Michael's or wherever you get your yarn, all right? Also, as I said, when I was practicing, I actually used embroidery thread to do my first little square, which worked fine for me. So if you're just trying to practice and see if you like knitting, I would highly recommend you just get the knitting needles or like the knitting needles set, and that you just practice with like embroidery thread or something cheap. You could probably even use like, wait, test something out here on camera. I'm just curious. Let's see if you can use chopsticks, okay? It seems that if you're trying to practice casting on, you can definitely use any thread you have at home with chopsticks to practice casting on. So that's pretty cool. Let's see about knitting. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and say it's not easy. It's not fun to do because your chopsticks are like blunt at the ends, right? But if you have chopsticks that are like more pointy, you can definitely knit with these. I am literally knitting with chopsticks. So if you want to do this for the cheapest possible and just practice knitting, I just knit 5 stitches on chopsticks. So you can use probably embroidery thread and chopsticks, though I highly recommend you get knitting needles, okay? I'm not recommending you do that. I am recommending you get knitting needles. However, in time of need, you can use chopsticks, okay? Go ahead. Okay. Casting on. So this is how you start any knitting project. What you're trying to do here is you're trying to get the first stitches on your needle. So what you want to do is I have my ball of yarn over here, and I want to pull out a tail that is long enough that it'll adequately make all the stitches I need to make. So if I'm trying to make 30 stitches, I'll need a longer tail versus if I'm trying to make 5. Today we're just going to make 10, and I'll show you how to start that. So first, you want to make a loop, okay? So I'm just twisting over. I haven't done anything. I just have a little loop like this, okay? So all I've done is make a loop like this. It's just like that. I'm going to take the tail end and put it through the loop. So I've taken the tail. Show you, here's my loop. I'm going to take the tail, put it through the loop, and pull, all right? So that's just going to create a little loop like this. And what you want to do is you want to find whichever way that the tail end is coming out of it, okay? So you don't want to position it in your hands with this end. This is the long one going to the ball of yarn. You want to turn it so that the tail end is at the front, okay? And the way you can test that is by, I'm putting it on my needle. Right, so position it so it's straight. If I pull on this one, where does it connect? Well, this one connects to the ball of yarn. If I turn it around, this string will actually pull it tight, and that's how you can tell that you got it right. Then what you want to do, okay, so that's your first cast on stitch. I'm going to take the tail end, so the shorter piece, not the one that's connected to the ball of yarn. Hold the yarn like that in your hand, okay? So this is my left hand. I'm going to hold it like this, put my thumb underneath and twist, put it in the needle. I'm going to take the other piece, twist it between my thumb and the needle, and then I'm going to take this piece that was around my thumb and bring it back over. I'm going to go twist around the thumb between the loop, between the needle and my thumb, and then bring the one that was around my thumb back over. All right, and it may seem weird now, but it'll get more natural as you go. I remember when I first started this, I had to try this over and over and over, and this was the part that I kept forgetting. But once you get used to it, you'll be good. So I'm at 20 stitches now, and let's say I want to go to 100 stitches. Well, when I reach 100 stitches, it's going to be really annoying to count each individual stitch because they're so small and they can group together. And so what I find helpful is count till you get to a number that's like a manageable counting number. So this is 20 stitches, which I find to be a good place. I'm going to take my stitch marker, I'm going to put it on like this, upwards, just because then it's out of the way. Okay, and I'm just going to continue. And the stitch will be created as if it wasn't there, all right? And that just stays out of the way, and that counts. So you know there's 20 on this side and 1 here. Let me show you. So I'm just going to keep going till 30 now. Anyways, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I can remove 1 stitch, okay? And to remove a stitch, I'm just going to bring that stitch to the end and take the loop off. And that's how you remove a stitch, just like that, all right? And then to take a stitch marker out, all you need to do is push on the little clip. You see, and I'm just pushing it out. And you could also add them in if you're counting like this. I can count to 20 and then I can add it in the middle, you see? All you want to do is you want to make sure that you can count easily. Now we're going to do the knit stitch. So I have my 30 stitches cast on, and I'm going to take my tail end and put it to the side. We are not using that anymore. That is only used for casting on. After that, your tail end's done with its work. So you want to take your second needle, and what you want to do, okay, and I've loosened this stitch just so you could see better, is you want to put it behind the other needle in the stitch. So once again, you can see this stitch here, okay, that's one of my 30 stitches. I'm going to put it in the stitch behind the other needle. Okay, and then I'm going to take the yarn, the piece, not the tail end, but the yarn that's connected to the ball, and I'm going to loop it like this between the 2 needles. Okay, so just again, I'm going to loop it in between. And then what you're going to do is now you've created a little loop. Like this is from what you just did. And I'm going to remove this from the first one. I'm going to remove that first one from the needle. So once again, okay, I'm going to put the needle through here, okay, take the yarn from the one, not the tail end, the tail end's here. I'm going to take the yarn, put it in between the 2 needles, and pull this out and pull it off, okay? Once again, pull it off. Through, in between, back through, and off. Through the hole, all right, in between, and off. This may be awkward at first, but you will get the hang of it pretty soon. It's important when you do the knit stitch that you keep your working yarn in back of your needle, okay? Make sure it's not in front like this, because if it is in front and you try and do a knit stitch, it'll turn into a weird double loop thing, which is not what you're looking for. So, I don't know if you could see that. I'll show you again. I'm going to add the stitch marker here so you can see what it looks like if it's wrong, okay? So, to do it wrong would be the yarn in front, which will actually make these 2 awkward stitches, right? Which is not what you're looking for. So again, what you're looking for is keeping the yarn in back. So look, this is in front, that's in back. And when it's in back, you'll have easy access to pulling it from the back, around the middle, through the loop, and off. And that's 30 stitches. So now I have done 2 rows of knit stitch, and I recommend if you're learning how to do the knit stitch, or for any of these stitches, you try and do a few rows of it until you feel comfortable and you have no real holes. So my first attempt doing the knit stitch I have here. I actually made a bunch of these holes, which were just due to having the yarn on the wrong side or missing a stitch and things like this. And this is the way the knit stitch will look when you do the knit stitch on both sides. So now we're going to move on to the purl stitch. All right. So when you do the knit stitch, you would keep your yarn in back and put your needle in back. When you do the purl stitch, it is literally the opposite, and it'll literally create the opposite of the knit stitch. So you're going to take your yarn and you want to hold it in front, and you're going to take your needle and you're going to put it through the loop in front. All right. So again, the knit stitch, yarn was in back, needle was in back. This one, your yarn is in front and the needle goes in the loop in front of your needle with the stitches on it. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take the yarn, all right, and you're going to twist it from the front in between and around, and then you're going to pull it through, and just like the other one, you're going to pull it off. All right, so let's go over that again. Yarn has to be in front. I'm going to hold it in this hand, put my needle in between the loop in front of the other needle. I'm going to put the yarn in the middle, in the back, and then around. So again, in the middle, in the back, and then around. Pull it through, and then pull the needle off. And just make sure, once again, you always keep your yarn in front. So you see, it's in front. This is what it would look like if it was in back, right? You can't see it here, it's in the back. You want it in the front. And the way you pull it is just between the two needles. You want it in the front, and you're gonna go through and over. I'm just gonna keep showing you. All right, so that is the purl stitch, okay? And the purl stitch, if you remember, this is what the knit stitch looked like when you do it every row. Well, this is what the purl stitch looks like when you do it every row. It looks the same because it's literally opposites. So that means this is the right side of my knitting here. This is, look at this little square. This is what the knit stitch looks like. If I were to flip it over, it is the exact opposite. It's hard to tell, but in every place that there's one of these loops, there's no loop there, if that makes sense. Next up is the stockinette stitch, which is what we're using for the majority of our knitting, and it actually looks like this. It's these clean columns of V's going across the fabric, all right? And the way you do that is that when you're on the right side, which I am not right now, you'll do knit stitches. And when you're on the wrong side of your knitting, you're going to do purl stitches, and you're going to alternate between the two every side. So right now I'm on the wrong side, which I can tell because my tail is to the left here, okay? This is the right side. And it may be hard to remember, but just remember your tail is going to always be to the right when you're on your right side, okay? So that means, like I said, when I'm on the wrong side, I do purl stitches. When I'm on the right side, I do knit stitches. And I do that for the entire row. So now we know purl and we know knit. So I'm going to show you what you do. On the wrong side of your knit, the purl stitch will look like little bars, all right? And on the right side, it's hard to tell, but it will look like little V's. Okay, so if I pull it up here, I can see the little V's. So now I'm on the right side, because remember, the tail end here is on the right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do knit stitches. I'm going to keep alternating. So purl stitches when I get back to the wrong side, knit stitches when I go back to the right side. All right, so now I've gone ahead and done 4 rows of the stockinette stitch. All right, so what that means is you saw me do the first row was purl on the wrong side. The second row was knit on the right side. The third row was purl on the wrong side. And the fourth row was knit on the right side. All right, and as you can see, because the purl and knit are exact opposites, when I do the knit on the right side and the purl on the wrong side, the right side will end up looking like a bunch of knit stitches, because it literally is, and the wrong side will end up looking like a bunch of pebbles, because that's what it is. It's a bunch of purl stitches, because, again, the purl stitch and the knit stitch are opposites. All right, so that's your stockinette stitch. And when you do a lot of it all together, tightly packed, it'll actually look like this. All right, so we just did a small amount. And here you can see every single V that you can see here represents 1 stitch. So the whole V is 1 stitch. So for example, between here and here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches. 1 knit on the right side, 1 purl on the wrong side. 1 knit on the right side, 1 purl on the wrong side, so on and so forth. That is what this whole sweater is. So once you get the stockinette stitch down, which is just knit stitches and purl stitches, which is just alternating knit stitches and purl stitches, you can almost knit the entire sweater, okay? So just practice that till you feel comfortable. So the only other stitch pattern required for this sweater is what you find at the bottom, okay? Which looks like this. And what you find at the bottom of the sweater, in the center detail of the sweater, on the sleeves of the sweater, and on the turtleneck, all right? So this other stitch pattern is called purl 2, knit 2, rib, which is pretty much self-explanatory. It is purl 2, knit 2, rib, okay? So what I'm going to do is, you can see I'm on my wrong side. It'll tell you in the pattern whether you should start with purl or knit, okay? Here I'm just going to start with purl. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to literally follow the instructions. I'm going to purl 2, all right, with the yarn in front when I purl, and then I'm going to put the yarn in back. So you see this? The yarn's in front. I'm going to bring it to the back, and I'm going to knit 2. 1, 2. And I'm going to bring the yarn back to the front, and I'm going to purl 2. And I'm going to bring the yarn back to the back, and I'm going to knit 2. And so you just want to keep repeating this the entire way down the line. So once you've done an entire row of knit 2, purl 2, you'll be able to see, because it'll look like an alternating, you see there's 2 pebbles, 2 V's, 2 pebbles, 2 V's. That's how you can tell you've done knit 2, purl 2 the whole way along. You're going to do the exact opposite on the other side. So if you started on the wrong side with purl 2, you're going to flip it over and start with knit 2. So on the wrong side, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2. On the right side, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2. All right? And the way they'll write this in the pattern is they'll say knit the knit stitches and purl the purl stitches, which is confusing, because if you started with 2 purls and you flip it and it says purl the purl stitches, you'll think that you're supposed to, continue the same way, but that's not what that means, okay? What it means is when you do a purl stitch on this side, it'll look like a knit stitch on this side. So what you're basically going to do is you're going to do the exact opposite, like I said. So if you started with 2 purl, you're going to do 2 knit, and then you're going to keep going with the pattern all the way along. All right, so I've done the purl 2, knit 2 3 times now. So what that means is I did purl 2, knit 2 on the right side, knit 2, purl 2 on the wrong side, and purl 2, knit 2 again on the right side. And finally, you're starting to be able to see a pattern emerging, all right? And I'll show you better on my sweater that's already done. But what this looks like is the knit stitches on the right side will look like these V rows, right? And the purl stitches on the wrong side will look like the little pebbles, okay? And so it's a little bit hard to tell here, but you can start to see the pattern emerging. And again, like I said, on the opposite side, it'll look exactly the opposite. So this row of knit stitches on this side is a row of purl stitches on this side. And so once you have stockinette stitch and knit 2 purl 2 down, you can knit the entire sweater using those 2 stitch patterns. So now you know all the basically knitting stitches and patterns necessary to complete the entire sweater. So before you get to this point, you should have completed a few rows of knit stitch till you're able to do it without error, a few rows of purl stitch till you're able to do it without error, a few rows of stockinette stitch, which is alternating between knit and purl all the way along the row without error, and then a few rows of purl to knit to rib. And once you can do all that, there's a few other things you need to know how to do before you can go into the sweater. All right, so the first of which being you have to know how to decrease, okay? So in the pattern, this will be written as knit 2 together, okay? And so what you're gonna be doing is you're gonna be quite literally taking 2 stitches, okay? And it can be hard sometimes to get under them. Just make sure in the same way that you would get under one, you get under the 2 stitches next to each other, and then you're just gonna knit them together as you would knit anything. So those 2 stitches have now turned into 1. So we can do that again. Knit 2 together. It could be a little bit awkward to pick up the stitches. So just carefully, you don't have to do it that much actually when you knit, only when you're trying to decrease. So I have 2 stitches on my working needle, and I'm going to take my yarn and do a knit stitch. And so those 2 stitches have turned into 1. Okay, and I'm just going to do this all the way along the row. Generally, you don't do it all the way along the row. Knit 2 together. And that is how you decrease in stitches. So if you're finding it hard to grasp both the stitches, what I find to help is just to pull up both the stitches a tiny bit with your fingers, and then they should be loose enough to get through easily. All right, so that's just a little tip if you find it difficult. Just make sure, even if it's awkward and you're stumbling around, that every time you're trying to knit 2 together, you get under both stitches, all right? All right, so now we have learned how to decrease by 1, okay, by knitting 2 together. So the next thing we have to learn is how to increase by 1, okay? And this is a little bit awkward the way you do it, but you want to make sure that you're doing stockinette stitch when you're doing this. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but I've redone a few stockinette stitches to practice this, okay, which you'll want to do, because otherwise you'll end up with holes like this. All right, I just wanted to show you what you'll end up with if you try and do this increase 1 stitch on a purl stitch, okay? So we're trying to do this on knit stitches, which means you want to have the last row be a purl stitch on the wrong side. And now you're going to turn it to the right side, and it'll look like the stockinette stitch, right? Okay, so what you want to do, so here's a knit stitch. I'm going to do 2 knit stitches. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bar, the top bar, okay, so you can see that there's multiple bars. I'm going to take the top one, bring it over the needle, front to back. Then I'm going to loosen it like this just to make it easier to go through. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm literally just pulling on it with this finger, pushing it to the side. Then I'm going to just knit it like I would any normal stitch, okay? One final time. You pick up the bar, bring it over front to back, and then knit the stitch. So that means you put your needle in back, and then you just knit like normal, and you won't even be able to tell that you've increased 1, you see? So just remember, when you're increasing 1, you actually want to do this on knit stitches, because if you do it on purl stitches, you'll end up with holes like this, okay? And then you'll end up with holes like this, and then you'll feel like you're doing it wrong, but you're not doing it wrong. You're just creating holes because you're doing it on purl stitches, okay? All right, so here's my awkward piece of test knitting here. It's not beautiful, but that's okay. I'm finished with it, okay? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to cast off our stitches, which is how you get them off the needle. What it'll look like in the end is a clean row of stitches like this. This is where I cast off on my first one, okay? And it's really not hard to do. All you have to do is you're gonna knit your first 2 stitches. 1, 2. All right, so I've gone ahead and knit my first 2 stitches, and some people use a needle. I generally prefer to use my fingers. What you want to do is you want to lift up the first one of the 2 that you did, bring it over that second one and off the needle, okay? We'll do that again. So now we just have, so you already have 1 stitch on the needle. Now you just have to knit a second stitch, right? And then you're once again going to bring the first stitch off the needle over the other one. Okay, and I just prefer to use my fingers just because I feel more comfortable with it. But I think most people use the needle, so you can decide for yourself. But once again, there's 2 stitches. I'm taking that one over, okay? And so the main mistake that I made while knitting, and I did this a few different places that you don't want to make, is you don't want to pull your stitches super tight. Because what that actually does is makes it super taut, okay? Which is fine in some cases maybe, but it's not the best. For example, where I made my mistake, when you have a sleeve that's really tight because it makes it hard to put on. So what you want to do when you cast off your stitches, especially when you're casting off for your sleeve and your turtleneck, is you just want to loosely bring it over. So I'm not pulling it tight like that. Okay, avoid doing that. Just do it loosely. It'll still hold just as well, okay? So just like this. Like I'm going to pull it over and leave it. Okay? And it doesn't have to be super loose. It just doesn't have to be super tight either. All right? All right, so now you know all your stitches, okay? And you know all your stitch patterns, you know how to cast on, cast off. Next up, you have to find your gauge, okay? And if you know how to find gauge, skip this section, just go check out the pattern. Otherwise, I'm gonna tell you what you have to do. So your gauge is basically how many stitches fit in a measurement. In this case, and in most gauges, you're trying to figure out how many stitches fit into 4 inches of length, I guess. And what this will determine is whether you're a tight knitter or a loose knitter. So if you have exactly the amount of stitches that it recommends you to have in your 4 inches, then you're good to go. You can start right away, and your knitting needles are fine. In my case, I was a tight knitter, which means I had to size up my needles, okay? And all this can be explained. I'm gonna link a video down below which goes into a lot of detail, and it's only necessary for you to watch if you find that you have too many or too little stitches in the 4 inches. Okay. Basically what you're going to do to find your gauge is you're going to be knitting a little test square of your stitch pattern. And so in this pattern you actually need to find 2 gauges because there's 2 different stitch patterns. There's the purl 2 knit 2 rib, and there's the stockinette stitch. So for the stockinette stitch, which is written as knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side, you're going to want to take your larger knitting needles, which the pattern recommends to be your size 8 knitting needles. And so for this gauge, for your stockinette stitch, in 4 inches, you want to have across 16.5 stitches, and vertically, you want to have 21 rows. So the 21 rows is easy. You're just going to knit 21 rows beginning to end, and then you can measure it. And if it's 4 inches, you're good. And for the horizontal measurement, it says you want to measure 16.5 stitches. But you don't want to cast on 17 stitches because it's going to be really hard to measure because the ends will curl in and they might stretch. And so best thing you can do is add 5 stitches to each side when you're casting on. So in this case, you're supposed to measure 16.5, let's say 17 stitches, cast on 27 stitches, okay? and that will allow you to measure between those two groups of 5 stitches, and the ends won't curl in, and it'll just be easier to measure. So what you want to do is you want to take your size 8 knitting needles, okay? You want to cast on 27 stitches and knit 21 rows, okay? And once you've done that, you want to measure if you got 4 inches across for 16.5 stitches and 4 inches down for all 21 rows. And if you got that, you're good. And if not, go check out the video that is under the gauge section of my description. Okay, now you have to find your second gauge because we have 2 stitch patterns in this wonderful sweater. So the second stitch pattern, as we know, is the rib, which is purl 2, knit 2. And in this one, you only need to measure across. You don't need to measure vertically. So again, we're going to be measuring 4 inches. Again, take your needles and you want to knit purl 2, knit 2 rib, okay? And you only need to measure across. So it says you want to measure 19 stitches within 4 inches. So again, cast on 29 stitches. Knit, I don't know, like 10 rows or something like that. You don't have to knit too much. Just knit until you're able to get a clear measurement. And once you're able to do that, check if it's 4 inches. If it's not, check the video in the description. The way you measure is you basically, as we've already determined, each V is a stitch. So you basically want to measure across a row. It's hard to do like this, like that, okay? So as you can see, in the 1 inch here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, I think. It's hard to tell, but yeah, basically 4 stitches. That's how you measure. It's really not that hard. You're just trying to measure to see if you're on target for your stitch count within the measurement, within the 4 inches. And I wasn't, so I sized up my needles, which is why I recommend you actually buy a whole set of needles instead of just the ones recommended in the pattern. And you should also wait to get your circular knitting needles because that way you'll be able to get the ones that are appropriate. All right, so next up, I'm gonna talk about some troubleshooting things that could go wrong, such as dropping a stitch, such as needing to go back on a row, other things like that. So let's talk about it. Thing number 1, okay, your thread, your yarn, is always gonna be on the needle front foot first. So let's look at this. There's a loop that has a front piece and a back piece. And if you ever, lose the loop, to be able to knit and make sure there's no holes or other problems, you always want to make sure that the back part of the loop goes to the back, okay? So this may seem normal, but what this looks like is like this, okay? So the loop always has the front foot in the front. This may seem useless, but believe me, you're gonna need to know this many times while knitting in case something falls off. So if something falls off, let's talk about that. So if I'm knitting, I'm just knitting some purl stitches. We'll start with purl stitches. And then something just falls off, okay? What can happen here is that your stitches will become loose and you'll end up somewhere along the way with a loop that is no longer connected to the main knitting part. What you basically want to do, and you can do this with your knitting needle, but once again, I like to be a rebel and I can't seem to use my knitting needle, is you want to take that loop. It might be lower down. This one I've only lost 1 bar, but sometimes you may have lost 4 bars. You may have dropped a stitch and it might have pulled all the way down to the beginning. What you basically want to do is if it's a purl stitch, okay, you want to bring it in back of the bar. So you see now I have the loop in back of the bar, and I want to bring the bar through the stitch and pull the bar up, okay? And that's how you recover the stitch, okay? So just again, I dropped my stitch, I picked up the stitch. For a purl stitch that you've dropped, you want to bring the bar to the front and make sure you pick up the bar. And if you've dropped down multiple bars, just go bar by bar, picking it up. And for knit stitch, you do the exact opposite. So if I've dropped a knit stitch, I want the loop to be in front of the bars I've dropped, and then I'm just going to grab the loop through like this. So as I was saying, because this is a purl stitch, we're going to put the loop in back of the bar, okay? We're going to pull the bar over the loop and then pull the loop through, and that'll create, as you can see, the pebble bar of the purl stitch. And then remember what I said in the last part, you always want your stitches to go with the front bar, you know, the right bar, in the front of the needle, like that, okay? So if you put it on backwards like this, it'll look wrong. It'll not only look wrong, but it'll also be the reason you create one of these holes. So don't do that. Turn it on the right way, and then you'll be fine, okay? And so if you see, I'm just going to keep purl stitching. You see? You can't even tell that I dropped a stitch, okay? And I'll look at the other side. You can't tell at all that I dropped a stitch. So if I were to drop this next stitch, okay, you see, I can find the loop, but I'm going to let it drop one more. So now I have 2 bars that are outside of my loop, okay? And this is going to be the hardest to do here at the bottom, but we can still do it. And remember, we're purl stitching right now. So what we want to do is we want to take our loop with the first bar of the 2 that it dropped down. I want to put, and you could do this with your needle, I just find it easier to do with my fingers. I'm going to take the loop. I'm going to show you it with, you may find it easier to do with the needle. I'm going to show you with a separate knitting needle just so it's clean. I'm going to take the loop through, and I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to put this bar in front. It's kind of hard to see, I know. I'm going to reach through, pull the loop out. Oops. Pull the loop out. Now it's back, connected to both bars, and I'm going to put it front foot forwards on my needle. Oops. Now I'm just going to keep purling just a sec. Now if you see, you can't tell at all where you dropped your stitches, okay? It was actually here and here, and I can tell that because it's a little bit looser, but all the stitches are back on, so there you go. That's how you pick up drop stitches. Last thing you need to know how to do, like an extra little side tip, is how to add in an extra ball of yarn. And this is necessary for 2 reasons. Number 1, when you get to the collar, you're actually be knitting with 2 separate balls of yarn. And number 2, if you run out of yarn while you're knitting, you're going to need to add an extra ball of yarn on. So let me show you how you do this, okay? So I'm going to place my stitch marker just so you can see where I'm going to do it. Right here. Okay, and just so you can see, I'm going to knit all the way down these stitches, and I'm going to add a ball of yarn at the stitch marker, just so it's easy for you to see. So I'm just going to knit them, and I'll come back to you when I'm at the stitch marker. Okay, so as you see, I have knit to the stitch marker, and now I want to add a ball of yarn. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, for the knit stitch, I'm going to take my needle, put it through. You see, I'm putting it through just like I would knit, but instead of using this yarn that I was previously using, I'm going to take from a new ball of yarn. Okay, you can see I have a separate string. I'm going to create a loop, and I'm going to put it around in the exact same way I would if I was knit stitching. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go like this, the same way I would if I'm knit stitching. You want to keep your tail like you would normally separate, and then just keep knit stitching with this new ball, and you can just tighten that, and you can tighten it again later. So it may look a little bit loose right now, but don't worry, because once you start knitting these 2 together, you won't be able to tell, okay? So just keep working, not with the tail, but with your new ball of yarn all the way to the end. Okay, so now you can barely tell where I added it in. It is right here, and you can see there's still a wider area where I added that stitch in because it's still separate. But don't worry, because once we knit these together, once we bind these in at the very end, these 2 loose threads, and once we keep knitting, or in this case I'm going to turn around and purl all the way along, you won't be able to tell where you added it in. Okay, so please try and ignore the wacky thing going on with this little square, with this little rectangle of knit, because I was just I've just been using it for example, so I've been messing up purposefully. So let's say I realize I've knit all of this, and then I realize, oh no, I need to go back to this stitch, because let's say I'm doing the purl 2 knit 2 stitch, okay, and I can look and I realize I did 2 purls, and let's say I did it wrong, okay, for whatever reason. Or let's say I'm counting, okay, so let's say I'm counting my stitches and I realize that during the ribbing, instead of doing purl 2 knit 2, I accidentally purled 3 and knit 2, okay? So in this case, I'm gonna pretend like that's the situation, but there's a lot of other reasons you may have to go back and fix something. Okay, so that would also happen if you've dropped a stitch. You will actually have to go all the way back to where you dropped the stitch and put all the stitches back on your needle, off of your working needle, back on your left-hand needle to fix it. And so how do you do this? I find it easier to look at it, okay, and you have, this is actually your working needle, but you're gonna put it in your right hand, okay, and what I find is the easiest to do is you're looking for these little loops, I don't know if you can see, where the thread is coming out from, and you're basically going to loop in there and pull it off, and when you pull this, now you have recovered a loop, and you're just gonna keep doing this. And so what you want to make sure of is that you just keep your yarn in front. So if you're pulling off, in this case, I'm pulling off knit stitches, but I'm pulling them off from the back, so they're purl stitches. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure my yarn is in front. And if I'm doing the same thing with, with purl stitches, so they're knit stitches from the front, what I would do is I would just make sure that my yarn is in the back. All right, so it's the exact same thing. I am just going to, I don't know if you can see it, I'm going, look, I'm going to pick up my yarn. I can see this little tiny, oops, I'm going to pick up my yarn. So my yarn is coming out of this, right? So what I basically want to do is if I pull my yarn up, I should be able to see where the loop is coming out from. It's kind of hard to tell, but that is where I would want my needle to go, in the little loop that my loop comes from. And then when I pull my yarn out, I will have recovered the stitch, reached the mistake stitch, and just like normal, once I get there, I can fix my mistake, whether it's, I don't know, whatever it may be, and then I can just continue knitting like normal. Now we're looking at the pattern, okay? And so the first thing you want to note when you're looking at a pattern is your size. And this is where you can mess up really easily, and I did a bunch of times, which is remember what size you're making. The pattern has all 5 sizes written out, the one out of the brackets being the small, and the rest of the sizes are written in the brackets in the order that it says at the top. So the one out of the brackets being the small, and inside the brackets it's medium, then large, then 1x, then 2x, okay? And so what this means is that if you want to knit the right size of sweater, you need to make sure you're always looking for your placement, I guess, your number placement. So this is going to be written out throughout multiple times in the pattern. So for example, at the very beginning, when it says with small straight needles cast on 94, in brackets 102, 118, 126, 134 stitches. In my case, I made a medium, so I cast on 102, all right? In your case, you might be making a 2x, in which case cast on 134. If you're making a small, don't worry about the brackets, just follow the 94, and this goes for the rest of it too. As you can see here, it says knit 30 for small, knit 30 for medium, knit 20 for large, knit 28 for 1x, knit 22 for 2x. So just make sure you're always following your appropriate number, because otherwise you're going to mess yourself up. And I did this a few times. So we're going to start off, as the pattern indicates, with the back, all right? And I'm just going to read to you the beginning of the pattern, though you can obviously read this in the pattern. With your smaller needles, your smaller straight needles, don't use the circular ones if you happen to have those already, cast on your appropriate amount of stitches. So for me, making a medium, I cast on 102. Make sure you check the pattern to see what number you're supposed to cast on depending on your size. And then all we're going to do is we're going to work in purl 2, knit 2, rib, all the way until your piece measures 3 inches from the beginning. So what this means is that, it's pretty obvious, what this means is that you're gonna knit purl 2, knit 2, but this is gonna be the bottom of your sweater, and then you're just gonna measure it, and once your piece measures 3 inches, you're good. Make sure that you end with a wrong side row. And as I said before, you know it's a wrong side if your tail end is actually on the left-hand side while you're knitting it. So knit a wrong side, and then when you flip it over, your tail end will be on the right. Okay, I showed that before, so and otherwise, just the first 2 stitches when you flip it over should be purls, okay? Make a wrong side row as the last one you work, you flip it over, you're looking at a right side. So now, for the back, you should have 3 inches of purl 2, knit 2 rib. Don't come to the section until you've done that. Then what you're gonna do is you wanna decrease the rows. And so this looks kind of confusing, but it's not. I'm gonna tell you in medium, but if you're making a different size, look at the pattern, okay? So for medium, what you wanna do is you wanna knit 7 stitches, and then you wanna knit 2 together, okay? So remember, we know what all this means. It's back in the section that explains all the stitches. So you wanna knit 7 stitches, knit 2 together 4 times, okay? So that means knit 7, knit 2 together. Knit 7, knit 2 together, knit 7, knit 2 together, okay? And then you want to knit 30 stitches. So after you've done the first step 4 times, just knit across 30 stitches, all right? So if we're keeping track, and if you're a nervous counter like I am, knit 7 stitches, okay? And then knit 2 together 4 times, which will give you a total of 32 stitches on your working needle. Then what you want to do is you want to knit 30 stitches, just normally knit 30 stitches, which will give you 62 stitches, all right? And now we're just gonna do the reverse of what we did in the first place. So we're gonna knit 2 together and then knit 7 stitches. Knit 2 together, knit 7 stitches, 4 times total, okay? So in the end, you should have 94 stitches if you did this right, which makes sense because the first section will be 32, the second section will be 30 stitches, and then it'll be 32, all right? So the way you count this is you go knit 7, knit 2 together is 8. Knit 7, knit 2 together is 8, 4 times, 30 stitches. Knit 2 together, knit 7 is 8, 4 times is 32, right? So basically what I'm saying is you want to decrease from medium your 102 stitches to 94 stitches by doing the pattern indicated. So it's really quite simple. It might look complicated written out, but all you really have to do is read over the pattern properly. So once again, this means, what this is saying is knit 7 for medium, knit 2 together, and then how many times? So in this case, for medium, 4 times, okay? Then, once you're done that, you want to change to your larger needles, which is really simple. All that means is that you want to have your original stitches on your small needle, and you just want to have your working needle be a large needle, all right? Be the larger sized needle, okay? So it may seem kind of complicated, but it's really not. Just have the smaller needle in your left hand and the larger needle in your right hand, and once you've transferred all the stitches on to the left side using stockinette stitches, okay? So again, that means knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side. So you're gonna purl first because we're looking at the wrong side. Once you've gotten all those stitches onto the needle, what you're gonna do is you're just gonna get rid of the small ones and you're gonna start up with the large ones, okay? So now all you have to do, and this is really easy, you're just gonna knit stockinette stitch, which is written as ST, big ST, small ST, so stockinette stitches. And you're just gonna do that until the whole piece measures, in my case, for medium, 25 inches total from the beginning to the end. And again, you want the wrong side row as your last row. So knit a wrong side row, flip it over to the right side, and then we're moving on to the next section, okay? Now we're gonna start shaping the shoulders. And this is where I messed up a few times because I wouldn't remember to look at the medium section. So make sure you look at your size. So for row 1, to shape your shoulders, what you're gonna do is you're gonna bind off 5 stitches, okay? Really easy, bind off 5 stitches. So what that means is you're actually gonna knit 6, bind off 5, and leave that 1 extra one on the needle, okay? And then you're gonna knit all the way to the end of the row, which will leave you with 89 stitches, okay? Because you've decreased 94 to 89. Then what you're going to do is for the row 2 of shaping the shoulders, you're going to bind off another 5 stitches, and then you're going to purl all the way to the end of the row, decreasing from 89 stitches to 84 stitches. And then for rows 3 to 4, you're going to do row 1 again and row 2 again. It's pretty easy, and you're going to end up with 74 stitches for medium. And you can count this if you're a nervous knitter like me. You don't need to if you feel okay with it. So next step, you're going to be shaping the neck and continuing the shoulders. So what you first want to do is you want to place a marker on each side of the center 16 stitches. But what this means is you want to find the center and count 8 and 8, right? And then put 2 markers. So there'll be 16 stitches in between the 2 markers, okay? And what you do from there, you're going to start row 5. And we're going to bind off, for medium, the first 5 stitches, and you're going to knit to the marker. And this is going to be confusing. We're going to join a second ball of yarn. Stop using that first ball, and we're going to bind off the center stitches, remove both the markers, and knit to the end of the row, okay? So now what you're going to have is you're going to have a right side and you're going to have a left side. So it's going to keep telling you how many stitches you have total. And what you're going to be doing is you're basically going to be working with 1 ball of yarn for the right side and 1 ball of yarn for the left side. Don't let it confuse you. You're still going to have everything on the needle. You're just going to be using separate balls of yarn. And so for row 6 for medium, on the left side, you're going to bind off 5 stitches and then purl to the end of the right. And then there's going to be a separation. You're going to pick up your new ball of yarn, the new piece of yarn, and you're going to bind off 3 stitches and then purl to the end of the row. All right? And just keep count of how many stitches are on both sides because it's going to tell you in the pattern, and just keep following the pattern. It's not as confusing as it may seem once you've done that first few rows of binding stuff off. And in the end, you're just going to have your last couple rows and you're just going to bind them all off. And then you're done the back. Now we're going to start on the front, which is really easy once you've done the back. I'm not even going to go through every step like I did with the back. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to start again with your smaller needles. You're going to cast on from medium 102 stitches, and then you're going to work in purl to knit to rib until you reach 3 inches. Same deal, okay? Make sure your wrong side row is the last one you work. And just to double check that you have everything right, you want to make sure that the center 2 stitches are knit stitches, okay? And if you have that wrong, you need to either restart, but I wouldn't say do that. Just flip it and make your wrong side your right side, okay? If that makes sense, because you need the center 2 stitches to be knit stitches. So the way to figure this out is obviously count for your front, count 50 stitches, and the 2 stitches after 50, so 51 and 52, should be knit stitches, okay? So then the next row, we know how to do this now. We're just going to decrease our row, okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to, for medium, knit 7 stitches, and then we're going to knit 2 together, and we're going to repeat that 4 times. It's the same thing as for the back. Then what we're going to do is we're going to knit 8 stitches, okay? We're going to place a marker down. So basically knit your 8 stitches, place the marker on the knitting needle to work in purl to knit to rib. 14 stitches, okay? You're going to place another marker and you're going to knit another 8. So in the end, you're still knitting your center 30, the same thing as you do with the back side, but you're just going to make sure you place your markers after 8 stitches on both sides, okay? And then you're going to do the same thing as the back. You're going to knit 2 together and then knit 7 4 times until you decrease your entire 102 stitches to 94. Then we're going to switch over to our larger knitting needles, which we know how to do now, and we're just going to work in stockinette stitch up until the marker. And once you get to the marker, put the marker onto your working needle. So like just switch it over, which I'll show you how to do with these chopsticks, which I conveniently have out now. So if I'm knitting, I'm knitting, what you're going to do is you reach here, you basically just pick up the marker and slide it on. Pretty good. And then you just keep knitting. So you're going to work in stockinette stitch till you reach the marker, put the marker on the working needle, and then you're going to work in purl to knit to rib. So for example, if in stockinette stitch you were knitting knit stitch on the right side, then the first stitch you're going to do when you reach the marker will be purl 2. All right? You're basically, once you reach the marker, you're going to do purl 2, knit 2, starting with the opposite stitch that you were already doing before the marker, if that makes any sense. So you're going to do purl 2, knit 2 till the end of the marker. Then you're going to put your marker on your working needle, your second marker, and then you're just going to work in stockinette stitch to the end of the row. And you're going to keep doing that. So when you get to the other side, if you're going to be doing knit stitch all the way along, then you're going to do purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, you know. Then you're going to do stockinette stitch, so knit it over, and you're going to do purl stitch all the way up to the marker, then knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, then slip the marker on again, purl stitch all the way to the side, so on and so forth. And you're just going to repeat this until your entire piece for medium measures 24 inches, okay? And so it should look like this. You should be able to see how there's stockinette stitch, and then there's this center ribbing, and then there's stockinette stitch, okay? And that's how you know you're doing it right. End with a wrong side row, and once you get to that last row, remove your markers, okay? And now what we're gonna do, and we're an expert at this now, we're gonna shape our neck. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna place a marker on each side of the center 10 stitches. So again, we should have 94 stitches. So what you're gonna wanna do, for medium at least, is that you're gonna wanna count 42 stitches, place a marker, count 10, place a marker, and then there should be 42 after if you're double checking. So you should have 10 in the center. And so what you're going to do is you're going to knit to the first marker for the left side, again join your second ball of yarn, and bind off the center 10 for the neckline. And then you're going to remove the markers, knit to the end of the row, and you should have 42 stitches on each side, which we already knew because we counted it out. Now you're going to work on both sides at the same time as the pattern says, and we know how to do this now. So on the right side, purl to the end. On the left side, bind off 3, purl to the end. And just keep count and keep looking at the pattern. And when you get to the shoulders, it's not any more complicated. You're just going to work left side and right side separately with 2 different balls of yarn, binding off where they tell you until the very end, okay? So it's just a lot of reading and a lot of keeping track of where you are and a lot of counting your stitches, but it's not complicated. Okay, now for the sleeves, which we're making 2 of, as you would assume, and as the pattern suggests. So what you're going to do is you're going to work with the smaller straight needles again, as we know, and we're going to cast on, for both small and medium, 38 stitches. Then we're going to work in purl 2, knit 2, ribbing until we get to 2.5 inches from beginning to end, making sure your last row is a wrong side row. Very easy. Where this differs from the other 2 parts is that we're actually going to be increasing instead of decreasing. That's how sleeves have their like fun little like, I don't know, it's hard to tell, but our arms get bigger because we got muscles, you know? So our sleeves need to get bigger to fit. And if you're not dumb like me and you make your bind off really tight, your sleeve should fit all the way along your arm if you continue to increase. So what we're going to do, we're going to follow the pattern. On the right side, we're going to knit 7 stitches for medium, small, and large, actually. Then we're going to make 1 stitch, which we know how to do. Then what we're going to do, follow the pattern, we're going to knit 4 stitches, and then make 1. And we're going to repeat that 6 times. We're, once again, knitting 7, then we are knitting 30 in total, including the new ones we will have made. And then we're going to knit another 7, which here's where I get confused, okay? And if somebody has an explanation as to why this is, the pattern says this should leave you with 45 stitches. I end up with 44, but regardless, it doesn't matter as long as you either have 44 or 45. If you're 1 off, you're okay. I don't know how you're supposed to end up with 45 because 7 plus 7 plus 30 is 44. But whatever. Then what you're going to do is you're going to transfer your stuff onto the larger needles, and you're going to work in stockinette stitch for 7 rows. Just go ahead and do it. You're good. Then what you're going to do is you're going to increase the row by doing knit 1, make 1. Then you're going to knit all the way to the last stitch. Then you're going to make 1, knit 1. Okay? So that should increase your whole row by 2 stitches. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to keep repeating the last 8 things. So you're going to knit in stockinette stitch for 7 rows, and then the 8th row you're going to increase by 2 with the second and second to last stitch being the new ones. And you're just going to keep doing that 9 times for medium, which will end you up with, well, it says 65, but we're going to end up with 64 stitches, okay, I believe. Now I'm a little bit confused. I'm pretty sure you end up with 64 stitches. Regardless, you're going to do that 9 times, and then you're just going to keep working in stockinette stitch till your whole piece measures 18.5 inches, and then you're going to bind off. Here's where you have to be careful. But if you don't want to end up with these sort of tight sleeves that I did, make sure you bind off loosely, like I explained in the beginning, okay? Because if you bind off tight, like I did, you'll end up with sort of awkward, you see how the sleeve is bigger than where the binding is. Don't do that. Don't make the same mistake as me. Bind off loosely, okay? Then we're going to sew the shoulder seams together, okay? Pretty easy. All right, so if you've managed to reach this part in the video, you will have 4 different parts. This is on my floor, so you can see everything, and they're all curled. You can see how dirty my floor is. But yeah, we have 2 sleeves, the front that has the detailing, and the back, okay? And what our first step is to do is we need to put these 2 together. We need to sew together the shoulder seams. Let's do it. Okay, so here we are. I now have both pieces, the front and the back piece, next to each other. And what we're gonna do first is, this is at least what I did and what I found videos doing to make it easier, is you're gonna use either stitch markers, or you could use safety pins or something like that, and you're gonna find the first stitch of the shoulders and on both sides, and then again the first one, and then you're also gonna find the last stitch, or I don't know which one's which, but you're gonna match those 2 up. So I'm gonna show you how you do that. So on this side, what you're gonna do is, don't mix it up. This is the bound off edge. So what you're looking for is the first line of stitches, you see, other than the bound off edge, that goes to the top, which in this case is this one here, you see? Other than this, there's only the bound off edge. So I'm going to put my stitch marker through this, the top one of that first row, and then on this side, my shoulder seam here, because at this point it splits off, and so the first one here I think is this one. It's kind of hard to tell. No, it's this one here. It is sort of hard to tell, and so take your time with this and make sure you find the right one. So I actually found mine to be right here. So that is the first, oh wait, it might actually be this one. Yeah, and there you go, that's why you do this. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put this in my first, might be easier like this. Okay, now we have indication of the first line of stitches on both sides here. All right, I hope that shows. And now we're gonna go to this edge. I don't know what I did with my other, oh, here it is. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna unroll the fabric, since it tends to roll with this type of stitch from what I understand. And again, we're going to look for the very first line of stitches, which in this case is right up along the edge here. And we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna take the very top stitch, which in this case is right up here, and I'm gonna find it on this side too. All right, and what putting these place markers does is it just allows you to see how the pieces will line up, because we do actually have, you know, straight lines that will connect, and this will just like make sure you're on the right track and you don't skip anything, or I actually don't know why, I just feel like it'll be helpful. All right, so we've done that. And I also think it's helpful because these stitches are the hardest ones to find. So I think it's just useful to get those out of the way first, and then all you have to do is follow the rows after that point. Okay? So then what we're going to do is we're going to take a larger hold knitting needle. It's not a knitting needle. I don't know what these are called, but one of these types of needles. And we're going to thread it with our yarn. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the first stitch and put our little guy, around it. Okay, so you see? Around the entire V shape, okay? And I'm going to pull to make sure I have enough here. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. There, okay? And now I can remove this. All right? And so from this point on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by taking one stitch, and I'm going to envelope the entire V like this. I can't tell if it's easier if you go this way or not. Nonetheless, I'm going to envelope the entire V of the stitch, pull it through. And then I'm going to look at the next one. So I did this row. Next would be this row. Envelope the entire V of the stitch. All right. I think I'm going to go in this way. So then this one's sort of weird. So just look at the way. So I've just done this row. If it looks kind of confusing on your thing because you have a little mess like this is where I bound off my thing. Look at it like this. You have a row here you just did. I'm going to go to the next row. Oops, I just lost my thing. Okay, I'm going to go through this. And then through this one.
So what I actually don't explain very well in the video is that really all you're trying to do here is make sure you're finding the next stitch that you're supposed to be picking up, and that you pick up the entire V of the stitch, and then you find the corresponding stitch, so the next stitch on the other piece. So just make sure you do the front piece, find the corresponding stitch, and then do the back piece and find the corresponding stitch, picking up the entire V's and make your way along the entire two pieces until you get to the very end where you have the other place marker. And once you've connected both the front to the back at the shoulder seams, all you want to do is you want to, once you reach the end, leave the tail end out because you can weave that in towards the end.
Alright, so now we have the neck, or I guess I have the shoulder seams. Well, my finger looks so big. I have the shoulder seams sewn together. And next up, we are going to do the neck. Then we're going to work with the turtleneck, okay? This is the most complicated part, but it's not too complicated. I did mess this up multiple times, but you won't because I'm going to give you a really easy way to do it. Alright, so you remember how I said at the beginning of the video that making this turtleneck is super easy. Beginners can do it. There's nothing to be worried about, nothing to fear. If there's anything to fear in this whole process, since it's been pretty easy so far, this is it, okay? The biggest struggle is we are going to be picking up stitches around the neck, and honestly, I've had a lot of trouble with this, but this means that I can better tell you how to do it right because I messed it up many times. All right. And I'm also going to provide a link in the description to like different videos I use to help me figure it out. And I also just learned by trial and error. So be willing to mess up because you're not going to mess up that badly. You literally need to count the exact amount of stitches. And so all you have to do is go for it. And if I am not explaining stuff well enough, please watch those videos because they explain stuff really well. There's just certain things that apply to this sweater specifically, so watch the two of them. Anywho, what am I saying here? So, what we are trying to do is we are trying to create new stitches to pick up because all of our stitches are bound off, right, all around the turtleneck. We're trying to pick up new stitches, okay, so that we can knit the entire turtleneck. And so, your pattern will actually tell you how many stitches you need to pick up. And so even though there's probably like 120 stitches all the way around the turtleneck that I could pick up from, all I need in the pattern for a medium is 84 evenly spread out stitches, okay? So what am I saying here? What I'm saying is that what we want to create, and I'll explain how to do this in a second, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to pick up stitches on our needle again, so we have something to knit, all right? So, as I said, for me, I need to pick up 84 stitches, evenly spread out, except for this part. This is the only part where things can't be evenly spread out. They need to be pretty exact. So, on the front of the turtleneck, we have our purl knit little pattern going on. And the turtleneck neck part is actually the same purl knit pattern. And so when we reach this part, we actually want the pattern to correspond with the placement. So what I'm saying is that we want the knits to go with the knits and the purls to go with the purls, and we want it to line up so it looks nice in the same way that we did at the bottom here. Like you can't tell that they are, you know, like this is the band at the bottom and then it goes right into the pattern. We want to do the same thing at the top. And so we need to take into special consideration how many stitches there are here so that we pick up exactly the amount. So for me, I have 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls, which comes to a total of 14 stitches in this little fun pattern thing, which we are going to exclude from the evenly spread out because we need in this area exactly 14 stitches to be picked up. This will all make sense later, but what we're gonna do is I'm actually gonna turn the sweater over because I find this makes it easier, and I'm gonna use one of my stitch markers to section off this area because I don't want to evenly spread out the stitches there, right? So I find it easier on the wrong side because I can see the stitches better, at least the purl stitches flipped over better. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put my purl, I'm going to put my stitch marker in the center of the first part of the pattern, you see? So it's pretty easy to tell when you flip it over where that is. So I'm going to put it right in the center of the V, okay? And then I'm going to put it in the last one. And I'm going to basically just section this part out from the rest of the turtleneck because I know that this part will have exactly 14 stitches, if that makes sense. So what we're looking at now, and I'm going to be writing stuff down here. So we had this entire turtleneck, right? Between here and here needs to be exactly 14 stitches. And so 84 stitches minus 14 stitches is going to give us 70 stitches, right? So that means between here and here, I need to evenly space out 70 stitches. Okay? Got it? This is the confusing part. So, well, that's not the confusing part. The confusing part is what comes next. Basically, figure out how many stitches need to be evenly spread out. So the amount of stitches they tell you need for your pattern minus the amount of stitches in this little section. And then you know how many need to be evenly spread out. From there, what you're going to do is you're basically going to be splitting this in halves and in halves again to figure out how to evenly distribute the sections, all right? So, excluding this part, obviously. First thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to align my turtleneck here, my bound off stitches, fold in half. So I have the whole turtleneck. I'm going to fold it in half completely, the entire turtleneck, making sure that the sides completely align. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this opposite side. So I have, it doesn't have to be perfect, just around. So right now I have my first halfway point, okay? Just try to do your best to make it the halfway point. So now I know that I've put a stitch marker right there in my circle, okay? So this is my yellow stitch marker, and that means that this whole side, that means this whole side and this whole side are both going to be 35 stitches, which is already easier than 70 to manage, okay? And then we're going to split this again, and we're going to look at it like yellow to blue, or whatever. You're going to put the half you already put to the center stitch marker, and you're going to find the next halfway point. So I'm going to use green. So here on my circle, I have my green, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to split this side up, and I'm going to use, I wish I had another green. I'm going to use this pink, all right? And so, I'm going to redraw our circle because it's getting a little bit messy. We first separated off 14 stitches, leaving 70. Then we split over here, okay, with our yellow marker, which made these sections each have 35 stitches, right? And then what we've just done is we've put a stitch marker there and there. So I have my green stitch marker. I'm going to keep track of this because it will make it easier. And my pink stitch marker. And I'm just trying to lay this out in the most simple way possible because I messed it up so many times. So now we know if we have 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. So you could do 70 divided by 4 or whatever your number is. Or you could do 35 divided by 2. And either way, that's going to give us 17.5 stitches, which I know is not a whole number. However, that's okay. We're going to get around to that. I'm going to write this. So now we have from the yellow to the green, 17.5. From the green to the blue, which is here, right? 17.5. From the blue to the pink, 17.5. And from the pink to the yellow, 17.5. And I know this isn't an accurate drawing. $17.5. All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to split that up one last time. So we ideally would want to be putting stitch markers here, 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 and there, okay? I have actually lost most of my stitch markers. And so what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to put the ones in the direction that I'm going first, okay? So I'm going to connect, right, the stitch markers in the sections that I have them. And I know this kind of looks confusing, but it's just having, right? It's not, I guess it's not that confusing. So I'm going to take the blue and the pink, go halfway, and I'm going to create this slightly different shade of pink. Okay? And I'm going to do the same thing between the pink and the yellow. I'm going to create slightly different shade. No, same shade. I'm going to create blue. So now we know we have 14 stitches, and then we have 17 divided into 2 sections in all these places. So now, one more time looking at our circle, yellow here, blue here. Okay, and I'm just gonna show that this is where the fabric separates. It's like being held together by the blue, right? So what we have now is a section here, a section here, a section here, and a section here. Ideally, we will, okay? And so we're gonna do 8.75 stitches in all these little sections. I know this is like kind of looking confusing, but it's not that confusing, okay? So we're gonna have 8.75 stitches, which sounds confusing because obviously that's not a whole stitch. However, if you do it this way, right? However, think about it like this, okay? This is 14 stitches. Then you have, let's round it up. You have 8.75 to 9 because there's no 8.75 of a stitch, right? So we're gonna say 9 stitches. And what this means is that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sections that need 9 stitches, which 8 times 9 is 72, okay? But we need to have 70 stitches. So all you have to make sure you do is that somewhere along the way, if you deem it appropriate, you just want to make sure you subtract 2 stitches. So you can do it from here, you can do it from here, you can do it from here, you can do it from here. Point being, you want to put 9 stitches in all of these sections except for 2 sections where you're only going to put 8, all right? Now, how do you put stitches in sections? This is the next question. Well, I'm actually going to start off the special section, just because I find if that's going to take the most consideration, I would prefer to start there, though I don't think you're technically supposed to start there. I'm going to do it anyways. I think you're actually supposed to start at the shoulder seam. I'm going to start at the turtleneck just because I don't want to forget. If you believe that you won't make the same mistakes that I will, I recommend you do whatever the heck you want. You can start anywhere. It says to start at the shoulder seam. I'm going to start at the turtleneck because this requires the most consideration. So, what you do when you pick up a stitch, okay, is that you are putting your needle, and I'm using the circular needles now, okay? You're going to put your needle through a V, okay? So look at the way the stitches are done, right? We know now. And you're going to put your needle through one of the V sections, okay? And so, like I said, this section from here to here require 14 stitches, okay? But it's hard to tell where the purl stitches are, where that V is. So what I actually like to do is flip it over, still go in from this side, and I know this is sort of confusing, but nonetheless, you're coming in from the front, just make sure you can see the V, and you want to take the closest section, the closest V that's not the binding. So as in, you don't want to take one of these because that's binding, you see? You want to take the actual stitch that's up there. So once again, we're going to go back here, and I can see very clearly when I flip it over that my first section is here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thread and add it on the same way I would be adding on a thread. I'm going to take my yarn and add it on the exact same way that I'd be adding on yarn if I was just adding on yarn while knitting, okay? It's the same deal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little loop, okay? I'm going to make a little loop. I'm going to loop it around this section, and then I'm going to grab that section, okay? So you can see this is the loop I just created. I'm just going to grab that loop, okay? Now you've created a new stitch. And so make sure you put your tail aside, and you're going to be working from the ball of yarn. So you have one. And once again, when I find I'm doing a purl stitch, I find it easier to flip it over. And I'm looking for the next V. So here it is. I can see that there's a V there. And this time I'm going to literally knit stitch it. So I'm going to put it around like that and just carefully make sure and carefully make sure I pick up the right section, okay? And so the way you can test this if you're unsure if you picked up the right section is you can actually pull on this thread and make sure it aligns with your ball of yarn, okay? So if it's pulling your ball of yarn, then you've picked up the right thread, okay? And do this kind of tightly, but not too tight. And so now, this is easier because I'm at knit stitches. I'm gonna go right into my knit stitch here, and I'm gonna go 1, and I'm gonna go 2, okay? And then I'm gonna go back to the purl stitch, and I'm gonna flip it over if I need to, which I do, and I'm gonna see that the V that I'm trying to pick up from is this one, and I'm gonna get 1. Okay, so from this point here, just a moment, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, so from this point here, what we have is we have the 14 stitches from before, okay? And we need to pick up between this stitch that I've already picked up and this pink marker, 9 or 8 stitches, okay? And so, just to note, you are picking it up through the V's that are closest to the bound off stitches, but make sure you're not picking up the bound off stitches, okay? So you're trying to pick up, like look at it this way, the V, I think you're able to see, right in the center of the V you'd go, but you want to go right up against the bound off stitches, okay? The other thing you want to note when you're picking up stitches is that when you see a section like this, so these are the bind off, and then here, there's like a loose band, okay, of yarn. And what this is when we decreased our stitches back when we were binding off our neckline in the first place. So when you get to those sections, I will show you what to do. So first, let's do, I can see 3 obvious stitches here. So I'm going to do, so I go right through the V, around, and then I can carefully look to make sure, if you're unsure, that you pick it up, okay? And I'm going to do that again, right through the V, all the way around that, just like you would do a knit stitch, pick that up. And then I'm going to do another one. Right through the V, all the way around, and then you pick that up, okay? So I did 3 here, and they're not perfectly spaced out, but they don't have to be. All you want to make sure you're doing is picking up stitches, okay? And from there, as I said, I reach this band, okay? And what you don't want to do when you reach this band is go into a stitch here, okay? Because as you see, there's, I don't know if you can see, basically, there's a big hole that I can put my finger through where these bands are. And if you go anywhere around or below, I suppose, like anywhere below, including right under the band, it's just going to leave a big hole in your work. So what you want to do is you actually want to skip over that hole. So you don't want to knit in this row. You want to go across the band to the next available stitch, put it through the V, around, and there you go. So now I've picked up 4, 5, 6, 6, and then I have another band here, okay? So I think you can see how they're different, right? These are tightly wound together, and this is loose. So again, I'm just gonna skip over the band area, right across to the next V, and then I'm gonna do, I think, one more, which would give me 8 stitches, all right? So I've already done 1 8 stitch, so now I just have one more section that needs to be 8 stitches. The rest can be 9, all right, if we're keeping track. Okay, and so total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Okay, I have 14 stitches from the center, 8 stitches that go up until this marker, and what I find to be the most helpful so that you're not anxious the whole time is just count every time you reach one of your markers, okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this one off, and I know that from this point to this point I need to do 8 or 9, okay? But there's only one more 8 section, so I got one out of the way. And I'm probably going to do another 8 section over here, just so that I don't have to think about it till the very end. So I have to just pick up 9 stitches. It sounds complicated, but all you're really doing is you're paying attention to only pick up stitches where there's not these bands, okay? And just go between these 2 sections and pick up 9, between these 2 sections and pick up 9, and then between these 2 sections pick up 9, and then once you get to the sections you haven't split in half, split them in half, pick up 9, and by the time you get all the way around, including the original 14, I should have 84 stitches. Alright, so as you may be able to tell, I finally ended up getting 84 stitches on my needles, which I'm really excited about. So, what we have to do now is we have to
purl 2, knit 2, rib all the way around the turtleneck.
It's the same thing we did at the bottom of our sweater, same thing we did at the bottom of our sleeves, same thing we did between on this section on the front. The only thing you need to be aware of is if you started at the shoulder seam, you need to just count out and make sure that when you reach this area, it'll line up, okay? So because I started here, it's a lot easier, but otherwise you would need to count it out to see, you know, once you get to the end of picking up all your stitches, how do you have to start? Do you have to start with 2 knits or 2 purls to make sure that when you reach the center, it'll line up? You know what I mean? And so what you're going to do once you reach 84 stitches, okay, is you're going to, I'm going to put a stitch marker to show where my round starts and ends, because otherwise it can get really confusing and you don't know how many times you've gone around the turtleneck. So I now have on the right after the 84th stitch that I picked up, I have a stitch marker, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these round knitting needles just as I would regular straight knitting needles, okay? So I'm going to look at the pattern, which is 2 purl first, then 2 knit. So I'm going to bring my thread forward, purl 1, purl 2, and then I'm just going to keep going, knit 1, knit 2. It might be a little bit awkward at first, just keep going, and most of all, make sure that your purl and knit stitches align with the center. After that, you are just going to be
doing the purl 2, knit 2, rib all the way around as many times as you need until your turtleneck measures 5 inches. And just like with the sleeves, you want to make sure you bind off really loosely at the end.
Okay, so now at this point, I have knitted the turtleneck. It's 5 inches, but it's meant to be folded inward like this. So I also have a lot of loose ends because I had to switch yarn balls at some point. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to flip it inside out. And I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm just going to use another ball of yarn, just like we did to sew the shoulder seams together. Put this down, and I'm just going to connect it, just taking stitches up, all right? And just make sure that before I do this, I'm going to weave in these loose threads.
And I'm actually going to put a video in the description for how to weave in your loose ends, because I don't feel like I can explain it better than other videos can. So I think you might as well just watch one of the videos that I used to learn how to do it.
And once those are all weaved in, I'm just going to put this down, knit it like this, and then on the outside, it'll be clean looking. See? Alright, so now we're done our turtleneck. Then all we're doing is binding off loosely when you finish a turtleneck, because that way you can like stretch it around your head, because otherwise you wouldn't have been able to like get your head around it, just like these arms. And you're just going to, once you're done with that, sew it in place. So I literally just, you know, picked up stitches along both that seemed like they aligned and sewed it all the way around. And again, you want to make sure that this lines up when you knit it down. So you see how it looks like it goes up. There we go. After this, you're basically done. You're just putting things together. What you want to do is you just want to sew everything together. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to do that. And once you're done with that, you're done your sweater. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to look at the shoulder seam. Try and uncurl the edges a bit. It'll make things easier. Okay, and you need your measuring tape. And you're gonna measure around 7.5 inches down on both sides of the shoulder seam. Okay, so that's here. And once you get that, you're gonna place a stitch marker around where that is.
And then I'm going to place another stitch marker 7.5 inches down on the other side. So here I'm just flipping it down so I make sure I get the right measurement. And then I'm just going to place, another stitch marker 7.5 inches down on this side.
Once you have your stitch markers in place to what's 7.5 inches down, you're going to take your sleeve, okay, and you should hopefully be able to put it all the way around.
And so this is where I messed up because I actually made my bind off stitches for my sleeves too tight. But if yours are loose enough, your sleeve, when folded in half, should actually reach both of those stitch markers. And you just want to make sure that, to make sure it's loose enough and not like mine, it reaches both of those stitch markers when folded in half, and then just sew it in place. And do the same thing on the other side.
All right, so now we have our sweater with our sleeves attached just at the top, right? Okay, and I know it's sort of dark here, but anyways, we're gonna create
a seam going up the top of one side, leaving a little slit where the band is at the bottom. Just remember, start after the band, so you can leave that little slit, make a seam all the way up there, and then make a seam on the sleeves, and then you can connect all the seams in the armpit where you won't be able to see anything, and do the same thing on the other side. And then you're done your sweater.
Woohoo! You got to the end of this video somehow. If you ended up making the sweater, feel free to, like, I don't know, post a picture on Instagram, or I don't know, DM me a picture on Instagram. I don't know what people do with this. But yeah, you can at me or tag me or whatever you want to do. My Instagram is @roseart67. I'd love to see if you make it or if you're starting to make it. And if you have any questions, comment them down below. I would be happy to answer them. I'm happy to help because I had a million questions and I was very much helped by the lovely ladies of Knitting YouTube and random knitting forums. And I don't want you to have to go searching down random knitting forums like I did, okay? So, ask me any questions you need. Tag me if you create one of these sweaters or if you're starting to create one or whatever you want. And that's it. Have fun knitting. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope people actually find this useful because I would have found this useful. But I'm making this video because I know I would have found it useful when I wanted to knit a sweater. So good luck to any future knitters, and I hope you begin because it's a lot of fun. And yeah, if you have goals like mine, maybe it'll help you get a little bit closer to your goals. So have a wonderful day. Goodbye. Cheers. Have fun knitting.